Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to BBR Investigations. Tonight I'll be sharing a number of listeners' experiences that have come into BBR since 2020. Each report is written by the witness themselves and simply transcribe the words, added some of my thoughts on their cases, and I'll share some cases that are also startlingly similar. Let's start with a case from Sleaford in Yorkshire, a county here in the UK known for its cryptid and paranormal encounters. It has a rich history running back centuries in time, and even in modern times, amongst the hustle and bustle of busy areas, people still experience the most extraordinary of things. The lady who shared this experience with me wishes to remain anonymous, so I will refer to her as Dee. Dee lives in the Sleaford area. This took place in 2012, and she said, "Hi Deborah, I've been listening to your YouTube videos and wondering whether you'd be interested in hearing of my experience. It was sometime in 2020. I arrived home in Sleaford with my youngest daughter after visiting my other daughter and her husband, and they live in Grimsby. We've been gone a few days, and my son, who was 20 at the time, was looking after the house and our 3 cats. When I got to the door that night, I noticed that it wasn't locked, and all the lights in the house had been left on. I went inside and looked upstairs to see if my son was there, and I was going to ask him why all the lights had been left on. I looked up there, and as I looked up the stairs, there was a dark figure in the bathroom at the top of the stairs. I called my son's name, but something was odd. I knew that it wasn't him. I didn't take my eyes off this black figure. It had no features. It was just pure black. And I started walking upstairs towards it. I felt angry that it was in my house. I wasn't scared at all. As I walked up the stairs, it moved across the bathroom. It sort of glided slowly from one end to the other end. I kept my eyes on it, but I was nearly at the top of the stairs. The banister blocked my view, so when I got to the top, it had completely gone. I checked the bedrooms, and my 3 cats were clearly terrified. They were scrambling to get under the bed, and one of them jumped right across the bed, absolutely terrified. I've never seen them like that. Now, the front and the back door were both unlocked, and every light in the house was on. My son later told me he had definitely locked up before going to work, and there were no lights left on when he left. My youngest daughter, who was 16 at the time, went into her bedroom and saw that her posters that had been on the wall were on the floor, and everything that was on her bed had been shoved in a pile onto the floor. She tried to entice the cats out from under the bed with treats, but they wouldn't come out, which was really unlike them. They normally will do anything for a treat. The following morning, I went to get out of bed, and on the rug beside my bed was a monkey key charm with what looked like a whole pack of hair clips individually hooked around the string. Both the monkey charm and the hair clips were previously in my bedroom drawer. There would be no way of them being moved from that drawer without waking me up. It would require a lot of rummaging to get them all together. One thing I found strange about this is that when I came in the front door and looked, only then did the figure start slowly moving. It seemed like it waited for me to enter the house and look up, as if it wanted me to see it, even turning on all the lights of the house. It was years later I heard about other people seeing this black figure, or what they call the Hat Man. I've never seen it before or since, so I'm baffled as to why it came that day. I hope my story might be of interest to others, as most cases I've heard are at night, or during lucid dreaming or something like that. This was around 4 in the afternoon. Although it was dark because it was winter time, I lived in that house for 13 years when it happened, and about 6 months after the Shadow Man incident, we moved, as we were wanting to live nearer to my daughter in Grimsby. What was also odd is when we were moving in that November, everything went perfect. And I mean perfect. There were so many coincidences and things fitting into place that it was like something was helping us to move. But it was all good, and I wonder if all that's connected. My son said he had a friend over when I was out, and his friend went to the bathroom, and when he came back downstairs, he looked shook up. My son asked what was up, and he said that he'd looked in the mirror and saw his face, but it wasn't his face, and it wasn't mirroring what he was doing. Some of his other friends said the street was known to be haunted, but that was the only incident that I had to share. That must have been absolutely startling to come home and witness that. I mean, you come in the house and there at the top of the stairs is a completely black shadow figure with no discernible features. I wonder if it was connected to the house or to the land that the house was built on. I shared a case earlier in the year, very similar to this, and it took place in Trent Country Park, where a student had seen a strange shadow-shaped being that looked like a human, and he saw it on 2 occasions. After the episode aired, and I was contacted through the BBR website by a lady who wanted to share her experience in the same country park. And she said, "Hi, I had a really similar experience to the one the student had, but mine was a few years before. However, it was at the opposite end of the day. I went walking with my friend behind the old mansion where there used to be the water gardens Philip Sassoon had built for his wife. It was around 2002. We went off the beaten track. We were trying to get back to the Oakwood entrance of the park. We'd been walking for a while, and the sunlight started to fade. I felt like we were walking in a circle. All of a sudden, I had a feeling like I shouldn't be there, and when I looked around at my surroundings, I noticed a shadowy figure that was human-shaped, but with no discernible features. I didn't look at it for too long. I just said to my friend that we should maybe walk back as we needed to get home before it got too dark. I've never mentioned this to anyone until my sister-in-law and I were talking about BBR, and she told me about the story that you shared. I read this account of your experience, Deb, and it made me think that what I saw wasn't just a trick of the light or my imagination like I'd originally thought. Did you notice in both descriptions it said that it was completely black and it didn't have any discernible features? Well, another listener shared with me some horrifying experiences that they had when they were much younger, and that also centred on a 6 foot tall shadow being with no facial features. In approximately 2008, I had something happen to me that I'm really struggling to explain. This experience happened when I was 15 years old. At the time, I lived with my dad and his girlfriend, who had 5 kids, aged between 2 and 10. There were 3 girls and 2 boys. None of these were my dad's kids, but he took care of them as if they were his own. So we had 8 of us living in a 3-bed house. My dad and his girlfriend had a bedroom on the first floor. The 3 girls shared a room, and the 2 boys shared a room all on the first floor. I was given a room on the ground floor that was right next to the dining room and the kitchen. The door to my bedroom had glass windows in them, and this is important for later on with the encounter. Also, I want to mention that the stairs leading to the first floor were in the living room. I can see the bottom of the stairs from my bedroom, looking through the windows and the bedroom doors and across to the dining room. One week, they decided they wanted to go camping on a weekend, but I didn't want to go. I'd made plans to meet up with some friends that weekend. You know, as a teenage lad, hanging around with your friends seemed cooler than spending time with family. Anyway, that Friday night, they left, and I went out with my friends for a while. We hung out, had a good laugh, went home. I didn't have a drink or anything like that. I was completely sober. I got home later that night. I was on my own. I was so tired, I went straight to my room, got in bed. I was lying there, and the house was empty, except for me. It was strange to have this much silence in what is normally a very busy, noisy house. As I was settling down in bed, I started to hear footsteps walking across the landing. You could hear one foot after the next. Boom, boom, boom. It sounded like they'd come from the bathroom all the way across the landing and then stopped at the top of the stairs. I didn't know what to do. My eyes were wide open and looking directly at the bottom of the stairs. My first thought was to shout hello. I couldn't do it. It felt like something in the back of my mind was telling me not to move, not to make a sound. Survival instinct, maybe, or just fear of the unknown. Then the footsteps are back again, but this time they're coming down the stairs. You could hear the stairs creaking after each and every step, like they would if I was walking down them. My heart was beating out of my chest, and this was all happening within minutes of me getting home. I thought this burglar had had heard me come into the house and was looking for me. The footsteps kept going. The stairs were creaking. I could hear that this person was close to the bottom of the stairs now. I was alone, frozen from fear. I thought, there's nothing I could do against a fully grown man. And what if he's got a weapon? What can I do? I heard the final three steps as this person got to the bottom of the stairs. My eyes were glued to that area. And then I saw it. This was no person standing, it may be a little under 6 feet tall, was this shadow figure in the shape of a man, but it had no facial features and it just stood, a dark silhouette. It was even a little bit translucent and it just had this eerie feel to it. It stood there for what felt like forever and seemed to just be looking at the wall in front of it. It was just stood still. I started to question myself, asking myself if I'm seeing things. And then its head moves and looks towards the front door of the house. This was a slow movement, not a quick look to the side. And then it started to move its head back around and look towards my direction. As soon as it did this, I just threw the blanket over my head, hiding under my covers. I did not know what to do. Do I climb out the window and run? I've nowhere to go. I just stayed as still as possible and I listened out for any movement at all. And then I heard its footsteps again, but it was not coming towards me. It was going back up the stairs. I felt a bit of relief when I heard it get to the top of the stairs. It then started walking along the landing and the footsteps stopped when it got to the bathroom. I stayed hidden under my blanket, thinking about what to do. If I leave the house, where do I go? My family are camping miles away. If I phoned my friends and told them about this, they'd just laugh at me and say that I was crazy. Not knowing what to do, I just stayed there, lying awake for hours, when I must have finally fell asleep. I woke up the next morning, still on edge. I could not get the image of this thing out of my head. What was it? I've never seen anything like it before. I got ready. I went straight out the house. That night, I stayed over at a friend's house. I did not mention what had happened to any of my friends, and I didn't want them to think that I was crazy. I went home on the Sunday knowing everyone will be back at the house. I walk into a busy household, kids playing, running riot, having a laugh. My dad was upstairs. I shouted hello and walked towards the kitchen to get a drink. His girlfriend was in the kitchen and she said hello, and she said how surprised she was that the house was still tidy, and made a joke that at my age, if she'd had a free house, she would have had a party. I was still shaken from the experience, so I didn't really laugh, and I think she could tell I wasn't myself. She asked me what was up, and I explained it all to her. I thought she'd laugh, but her response was, "Yep, this house is haunted. I was shocked. I didn't know what to say. She then went on to tell me her experiences in the house. This response was comforting. It made me feel like I'm not crazy, or alone. Later, we told my dad about what had happened, and he said that he'd seen the figure before, and he'd seen it moving from one side of the kitchen to the other. After the encounter, I never wanted to stay in that house again. But after hearing more stories from both of them, I felt more comfortable with being there. One big thing was that this thing, it never hurt anybody. Having this sort of experience kind of normalised, it helped massively with it moving forward. It must have done. It must have been really good when you come forward and say, you share something and people say, well, actually, yeah, I understand. I've seen it too. We hear it week after week, don't we, in the podcast where people get in touch, exactly like tonight, because they've heard something I've put out there and they've gone, oh, yeah, actually, that kind of sounds like the incident that happened to me, or, that incident that happened to Mum or Uncle Harry, or what, normally a family story or a friend. And it doesn't matter whether you're at home, or you're out enjoying yourself, or you're driving the car. As I said earlier, people doing the most ordinary of things have the most extraordinary experiences. And it was those very happenings that took place in our next case tonight. Now, a strange, dark figure was seen running on the A58 road at Leeds. And when we think of Yorkshire countryside, where several of tonight's cases have taken place, it conjures up images of luscious green rolling hills, the Yorkshire wolds, thick woodlands, and of course the desolate moorland. It's a place of abject beauty, and hundreds of tourists from all across the globe visit Yorkshire every year. I wonder how our visitors would feel if they realised just how many dogmen, or werewolves, or paranormal experiences have been reported by members of the public in Yorkshire over the years. Yorkshire's history is a long, and tales of the supernatural stretch back through the centuries to a time when Yorkshire had far less of a human population. But don't let that fool you. So many of these reports happen in modern times, in modern towns, filled with the hustle and bustle of daily life. People out walking their dogs, or driving the roads, just going about their everyday business, when they are suddenly confronted by the unknown. I was contacted recently by a witness who we are calling Adeline for the purposes of anonymity. And Adeline said, I'm a female in my mid-50s living in Leeds. I've had a lifetime interest in myths of my area, particularly West Yorkshire and Northern England more widely. Most recently, I've listened to some programmes from Paul Sinclair, Joe Hickey Hall, and that led me to you, Deborah. I was a listener to Dogman Encounters Radio, and it's through that channel that I found yours, Paul's and Joe's content. I've had two incidents I feel are worth reporting here, but also much that I have always assumed to be the product of, say, a hypnotic trance or, some similar sleep type experience, or just the product of being in certain areas which generate a particular psychological reaction, due to them inherently being a bit dangerous. The things I report are oddly the most mundane in that I wasn't afraid at all, and everything about the real world felt absolutely ordinary. Anyway, here's my report about an incident that happened in the last week of October 2024 when I was driving along Whitehall Road in Leeds between Dixon Lane and the railway bridge at Dragon Drive. I don't know what it was that I encountered, so I don't know how to describe it. It happened quite quickly, around 8 seconds in all. I could see it clearly, as it was around mid-afternoon. I was driving along a road I travel every day. There is nothing special or out of the ordinary about it. Whitehall Road on the A58 is in Leeds. It's about a mile and a half out the city centre. It was around 3:25 to broad daylight, I was alone in the car, and at the time in question, there was no oncoming traffic and nobody driving close behind me. I'd just passed the Dixon Lane junction and was heading along. There's a 100-metre stretch to where the road takes a 90-degree turn to the right and it crosses the railway line. The railway is cut in to the right of me at that point, separated from the road by a stone wall about 4 feet high. There's no pavement to speak of. And to the left, there's a steep bank with a line of semi-detached houses on it, each with a steep garden that opens onto the pavement. These houses are parking at the roadside in a lay-by, and this lay-by was fully parked up. There was just one pedestrian, but I didn't see him until I looked into my rear-view mirror to see if anyone else could have seen it. The whole sighting took maybe 6 to 8 seconds. I was going about 25 miles an hour when I saw the figure of a young man running downhill on Dragon Drive, about 60 metres away from me. He was coming from left to right, going really, really fast. I could see his legs moving very clearly. He was wearing a black tracksuit with a hoodie. No doubt in my mind this was a person. My reaction was more, wow, look at him go. I moved my gaze to look directly at him because it was an impressive speed. We have a few people, around here who was about on electric bikes of various kinds. No helmets, just hoodies and balaclavas up to something, no good, who knows what. And this lad looked like one of them, minus the electric bike or scooter. I assumed he was going to dash across in front of me, and he was coming towards me as well as moving left to right. I thought he'd go down the side of the railway bridge that I was approaching. And what happened next takes a very long time to type, but it was only a second or two in reality. But then I remembered there's no path on the right side of the road, so it seemed weird. If you were running to do that, you'd stay back on the left, and there is a path there. Otherwise, you're just going to get run over. The bridge is a chicane with no space, and then I realised that I'd been wrong. He wasn't headed to the road at all, but even closer to me, towards the wall on my right. But that made no sense either, because there's nothing there but that wall and then the railway cut. It's a super steep drop. There's no way anyone would run there. As I peered at him, trying to see better, he was now in the middle of the road, clear of all the cars on the left, and it was like I could see the legs fine, but the upper torso was just fading out, like a shadow cast on the air. There was hardly any arms, and just a suggestion of them moving. And then honestly, not really any kind of head. I felt no fear of anything like that. I was just focused and looking at him, trying to understand what it was that I was looking at. I'm now about 20 metres away. As I stared, not sure I was really seeing anything right, this figure deformed more, so there was just this bipedal running movement in the lower part, and the rest was much more like a shapeless shadow, a kind of 2D kind of geometric edge, like a lot of hexagons fading out into nothing. My brain was at the point going, got to be a plastic bag, because a very stretched thin film, maybe of a bin liner, was about all it could have been compared to anything I've seen. I was still expecting it, to have to jump or hurdle a wall. I closed to about 10 metres from him, but it just went right through the wall as if the wall wasn't there, and it either dropped or just vanished at that point. I mean, a bag would have got caught on the wall. I'd say a third of it was above the wall height and the rest was below. The wall's probably only 4 foot high. I was now beyond it, just before the turn. I looked to the path to the left in my rearview mirror because I wondered if anyone else was around who could have seen it. There was a man with white hair walking along. We didn't seem in any way like he'd seen anything. It would have to have crossed in front of him, I think. Then I'm thinking, did I really see that? Could it have just been some kind of black plastic bag? But it had moved very straight, very fast, a constant speed and direction. The wind was really up, to that kind of thing, even with the leaves that were about. And the bag would have looked different, because bags are three-dimensional and they constantly deform as they move. This was, when I really looked at it, less substantial than that. You could see light through it. It was like a dark watermark. I never thought about the dashcam footage until I stopped the car. But then it erases it because I didn't press save, of course. I've never seen anything like that before. Nothing else was in any way out of the ordinary that day. Something of note is that this Christmas I saw my cousin. And since he lives on a street right there where I saw the running figure, I mentioned it to him and we got talking about ghosts and the paranormal. He's had several of his own experiences, but not like mine. He's seen ghosts, his remark on them was how ordinary they were, except that they couldn't possibly be there, if they'd been real. He wrote to me a few weeks later to say he'd remembered an incident from the 1970s when he'd lived with his parents about 100 metres from where I'd had this sighting. He said a friend of his dad's had come round in a tizzy one day afternoon, because he'd been gardening in his front yard and he'd seen a man in a dark blue tracksuit go running past the end of the drive down a hill, which would be about 40 metres from exactly where I saw mine. This man had been going unusually fast, and at that time, jogging was a very new thing. People didn't do it that much. And also, he was wearing a tracksuit, he mentioned, and it was an unusual dark blue colour. Had something strange about it that was not at all fashionable, not something anyone would be seen wearing. He'd walked around the hedge to the corner to take a better look at this man, and there was nobody there, and nowhere that he could have gone. It bothered him so much he searched all the gardens up and down looking in case it was a burglar or, a prowler. He never found anything. We had a short correspondence about it, and my cousin told me that the point where I saw the shadow drop into the cut is just before the old station halt that used to be there, and which is now a reclamation yard. He wondered if it was someone running for a train. If not, he thought maybe it was something, something in kind of a time anomaly. I don't know. For me, it was human to start with, not even odd. But by the end, it was so odd, it defied any rational explanation. It's hard to put it into words, even. Now, I've heard the description of this running figure before, from several areas in the UK, and one that sounds incredibly similar was reported at the infamous Stocksbridge bypass. I've shared encounters at the bypass in earlier podcasts, but there is a case from there that also features a strange running figure, impossible to describe, seen by a female driver. Judy and David Simpson bravely took part in a BBC series on the paranormal in 1994, where they shared their experience driving on the road to Wortley, Yorkshire. Judy drove along the B6088 near the bypass, and her husband David was in the passenger seat. Judy reported that while she was passing the bypass bridge, she saw a figure hopping or jogging in a field at the end of the road. Judy couldn't give a very clear description as she saw no contour. There was no face, no head, no details to be made out, and there were no identifying features. There was nothing like clothing or a hat. There was something to the shape that looked like it possibly had shoulders and maybe arms and legs, and it seemed agitated in its movements, and it was kind of moving in a distorted way, and it ran aimlessly through the field. As Judy thought it was a jogger, she didn't really think much of it until she realised its feet were not touching the floor as it ran, but it was floating approximately a metre above the ground. And then the figure leapt from the field, going up the road, and landed in the middle of the road in front of the car. Whatever this figure was, it should have been hit by that car. Judy hit the brakes and stopped the car instantly. But there was no sensation of shock, as if this thing had been immaterial or it had just disappeared. There was no bang as they collided, no bump as she hit him. He simply vanished from sight in front of Judy's eyes. Her husband also saw it. Um, although shaken and shocked, they got out of the car to try and find this poor man. But as they looked all around them, they found no trace of him or anything that they could have mistaken him for. Quite simply, a humanish shaped figure had run at speed at their car, and as they collided, it just vanished into the ether. As you can imagine, the couple were very upset, unable to believe what had occurred, and starting to admit to themselves that what they saw was possibly a ghost or some paranormal being in origin. They drove down to the Wortley pub to calm down with a drink, and they shared their story at the bar. Nobody ridiculed them. The locals themselves quite aware of the reputation of the place. I wanted to check my case files to see if I had any other reports of a kind of dark running figure seen on a UK road. I wasn't disappointed. A gentleman named Lamar had a weird experience when he was driving down the A1237 late at night, and he said, "I'd been to see a friend at Clifton Moor. I was heading back towards the A64. Although I was concentrating on driving the car, I was also listening to my music, pretty much gone into autopilot, as there were no other cars around, and only the occasional, roundabout to negotiate. Suddenly, I became aware of movement at the curbside, a few metres ahead of me, and before I realised what was going on, I was certain that a human figure had moved out in front of the car. I hit the brakes, but was still travelling at almost 60 miles an hour, when I should have heard the dreaded thud, and there was nothing. I didn't stop though. I'd slowed to almost 30 miles an hour after braking. I could see only the open road in my rearview mirror, and heard only a eerie silence. I sped back up to speed quickly, wanting nothing more than to get away from that place as fast as I could. Molly Jones said, "I had a weird experience many years ago in the UK, when I was on a quiet road in the countryside. I was in the passenger seat of the car when I saw an old man walk out from the side of the road from an area that was just trees, and he walked straight out in front of us, and I screamed as we hit him, but no one else saw him, and there was no impact as we hit him. But we stopped the car, as I was convinced we must have slammed into this man, and there was nobody there at all. We were the only car on the road. There were no street lights, although I saw him clearly through the headlights. It scared the living daylights out of me, and to this day, I still can't believe it happened. But it did." On the 13th of December 2020, a witness made a report of a tall, thin, black figure around 6:55 in the morning. A driver using the B684 road this time, so a tall, thin, black, human-like figure that stepped out into the road ahead of the driver. The figure stood out clearly to him. It was illuminated by his headlights, and they were on full beam. The figure moved backwards and vanished into the hedge. As the driver passed the spot, no one could be seen. Our next case takes part on a bypass, not the Stocksbridge. This one's in Newell. And it took place on the 14th of February 2012. And a family were actually returning home from being out that night. There was a man and a lady and their son. And the gentleman's name was Scott Martin. Him and his family were travelling home by taxi from Stoneleigh about 10:30 p.m. on Valentine's evening, when they saw a mysterious dark figure with no features dart across the road in front of them. Before leaping a 15-foot roadside bank around the area of Nescott College on the Ewell bypass. They were really spooked out by what they'd seen, and the 4-year-old son was too scared to sleep in his own room that night, and the taxi driver was none too pleased about him to drive back on his own. Mr. Martin said, "We were driving down the Ewell bypass and we saw a man on the other side of the road. We didn't pay much attention until he started crossing over to our side of the road. The next thing, he jumped over the centre fencing in the road and ran across our 2 lanes. On our side of the road is a bank, easily 15 feet in height. And this figure crossed our road, climbed that bank, and was gone from sight in about 2 seconds. All 4 of us were baffled and voiced our sighting straight away, with the same detail. We all saw a dark figure with no real features that moved very fast with an ease of hurdling obstacles that I have never seen. My last image of it was him running through the bushes at the top of the banks. Mr. Martin said the driver of the taxi really shared his fears as the mysterious figure made off with ease. Now, he said, "I'm not usually one to be freaked by these sightings, but even the cab driver was petrified. He didn't want to drive back alone. I'm honestly baffled by this sighting, and we're intrigued by it because it was so real, but so strange." His wife, Sasha, said it was more unusual in the fact that someone was trying to cross the dual carriageway in the dark and, at night. It really freaked us out. The family likened the figure to the legendary spring-heeled Jack. I think that was first reported in about the 1830s in the Wandsworth area of London. And that was a dark figure that was leaping out at people, kind of in the Epsom in Ewell area. So it does kind of fit in with that. I'm quite a sensible man, but I've never seen anything move that quickly across the road and not been startled by the fact that we were driving towards him. It's the first time we have ever seen anything like this. If it was a burglar or something like that, you'd know this was too fast, the way that it ran. They actually reported it to the police and to the college, but they hadn't received any other reports from any other people. It's just strange, isn't it, the way certain things crop up all of the time. These are in different counties. Ewell's not in Yorkshire, it's much further south. It's a very, very strange island that we live on, let's put it that way. The figures of beings in these cases didn't seem to interfere with the humans in any way. It was almost as if they were going about their normal activity, can I put it like that? While the human was also going about their normal activity. I don't really know what words to use in this kind of sense. I think what I mean is, I don't think the witness themselves were supposed to see what they did. I think it was something going about what it would normally do. And these people have tuned in at that moment, at that spot, almost like a catalyst. Does that make sense? As if they've driven into that energy and they've seen this repeat. Maybe, what do we used to call it? The stone tape theory or whatever. You hear me say it often that land holds energy. And it's almost as if that's what's playing out here over and over again. Another thing that I noticed was the lack of features. So an almost human-like body. Now, does that mean that the amorphous shape that they are seeing resembles a human in some way? Or is it us putting that human onto it? And it is an amorphous blob. But we try and make out what that thing is. Our brain is trained to make that into the figure of a person. So we could be seeing an energy form of something, something connected to the me of the earth, doing what it does as each person comes into contact with it. They all seem to be on kind of autopilot as well, very relaxed. You've heard me share the experiences of Deb Singleton in Yorkshire as well, and her creature stepped from the side of the road when she was driving. And most of Deb's experiences have taken place while she's been in that state of automatum, driving, doing something that you do on a daily basis, where you kind of tune out one side of your brain. And I think that's when we tune into things that are out there and we connect with them like that. But you may feel differently and you might have your own theories on that, and I would love to hear them in the comments. So, whether you are a new listener or old, I hope you've enjoyed the tales that I've shared with you tonight. I have many, many more of them. I've had 2 reports come in this week from separate gentlemen who both saw something when they were younger and strange, and I will be bringing those to you shortly. I've also, a chap got in touch with me who's had a kind of shadowing experience at Cannock Chase around the Castle Ring area, along with about, I think, about 5 or 6 interviews that I've still got to put together so I can share them with you. So stick around, there's some interesting stuff going to come up for you. And the new documentary is out soon. And when that happens, I will add a link to several of the YouTube videos so that you guys can check that out. It isn't anything to do with me. It was done by Liz, a lady that I know, a cryptozoologist. And I just took part and did an interview in it. But I think you'll enjoy it. So until then, let's say I shall see you on the same time, on the same day, next week. Good night, everyone.